It's always in the news. Cybercriminals attacking great organizations, wreaking havoc on the trust of their brand.
We socialize cybersecurity for you to raise awareness.
Interviewing leaders who built and protect great brands.
We help talented people enter into this incredible field, and we share our research at blockbuster true cybercrime stories.
This is Cybercrime Junkies. And now the show. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the show. I am your host, David Morrow. Welcome to Cybercrime Junkies. In the studio today is Christian Rodriguez, Field CTO of Crowdstrike, with an incredible story, really inspiring and just all around kind of Renaissance person. Christian, welcome to the studio, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I'm really glad that you're here. I appreciate you taking the time. Let's walk people, currently, let's explain your current role, but then I want to back up and kind of walk people through how you got here. It's a really cool story.
So as of February, I'm the Field CTO for the Americas. And what that ultimately means is that I'm responsible for working with our most strategic customers on aligning our vision and their respective visions on where their security program is evolving into, or what it's evolving into, and how that aligns with our roadmap. Ultimately, I'm also responsible for capturing a lot of feedback with respect to how they're using the platform, capabilities of the platform that they'd like to expand on. I spend a lot of time interviewing different SOC teams and understanding how they're using the platform today, or really what their response workflow looks like, even if it's independent of CrowdStrike, what other tools that they have access to, and then how do we then building a program or helping them build a program that coincides with our strategy for integrating into those other tools, right, and those third-party tools, and hopefully making them very happy with their investments, right? So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's phenomenal. CrowdStrike's got an impeccable reputation. I've got several friends that work there. It's just it's all around doing great work to keep organizations' brands secure. Thank you for all you do. Like it's remarkable. So now, as I understand it, you were born here in the U.S., but then you were raised you were raised down in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, I was raised in the island of St. Martin, which is
Beautiful.
actually, it's a beautiful island. It's a very big tourist spot. In fact, the entire economy, for the most part, is driven by tourism. It's built on tourism. So I lived on the Dutch side of St. Martin, because if you're not familiar with the island, it's owned by the Dutch and the French, right? So the northern half is owned by the French, and the southern half is owned by the Dutch. And I lived.
And you were
Dutch
raised
side.
On the Dutch side?
Correct, exactly.
Oh, that's good.
Side. Yeah.
That's good anyway, right?
Yeah, they're allies, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's excellent.
Yeah.
So what was it, just in generally was, where you are today when you think back about it? What was there anything about your childhood when you were growing up that made you really want to get into cybersecurity or technology? Anything like that, or was it just the drive and experiences you got after you got here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, here's a story that I've never publicly disclosed, and so maybe this is
exclusively here on Cybercrime Junkies, ladies and gentlemen.
So back then when I grew up, I'm a little older than some people think, but back then.
So am I. It's amazing what hair dye and a little exercise will do for us.
Exactly, online effects and CGI.
Yes, exactly.
Back then there wasn't really a large middle class, right? So back then you were either very, very poor, or you were very, very rich, and we were not very rich, to say the least. And so I didn't have access to a computer. It's kind of a crazy story. I didn't have access to a computer until I was like a late teenager, if you will, like more like 13, 14.
Which kids today would find mind-boggling, right? But when I was growing up, that was pretty much the norm. Right?
It was norm, exactly. And it wasn't even like a normal computer. Actually, there was we were very, very involved in the church back then, and my youth group pastor, he knew the conditions that I lived in, just really impoverished area. just like sewage, water everywhere, just it's really bad conditions. And my parents tried hard, right? But he brought over an old Tandy computer. It was like a dual floppy, right? And
Oh yeah.
this is in the times when Windows Windows 95 existed at this point. So it's not to say
Mm-hmm.
like there wasn't something better. It was just more of like, here's a donation, kid, and I know
Yep.
I know you're trying to get better, get ahead of life. And long story short, he spent some time walking me through inserting these floppies and understanding the command line interface and like launching these applications. And I'm like completely stoked that I have my first computer, which is a donation. And I'm just trying to figure out how to like launch things like Battleship and these other apps that he gave me and
Exactly.
these stack of floppies, right? And that was kind of like my first venture into understanding computers. And there's so many other stories that have come between that and now. But what's crazy about this guy that gave me my first computer is that, believe it or not, he actually is in our industry today. Like, he's in the cybersecurity
Really?
industry. He runs the CISO program at Palo Alto Networks, believe it or not. Yeah,
What? You're kidding? That's
yeah, it's
phenomenal.
a crazy story. In fact, in between that point where he gave me that system and now, there was a point in our lives where our paths crossed. I was actually working for a small reseller in Florida, and somebody called in randomly and they said, "Hey, I'm looking to order some firewalls, some Fortinet firewalls, the FortiGate 60s or 50s." And he said, "I
Mm-hmm.
just need like 5 of them shipped down to St. Martin." And I'm like, "Wait," I said, "Like St. Martin, the island?" And he said, "Yeah." And I go, "Oh man, like I used to live in St. Martin." And we just start talking. And all of a sudden he goes like, "Hey, is this your mom's name?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Is this your dad?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Hey, his name is Greg." He goes, "Hey, it's Greg." And I'm like, "Wait, Greg, like who gave me the Tandy computer,
You're
Greg?"
kidding.
Yeah, just
Really?
we're talking about like a decade of not talking to this guy, and then all of a sudden him
Wow.
calling up this reseller, buying
Was he a
Fortinet
family
firewalls.
friend? Was he a
He
family
was just
friend or somebody
a
in the
part of a
neighborhood?
church, just someone
Oh,
a part
somebody
of a
involved in
church.
the church, of
Yeah,
course.
and basically stopped by and said, "Hey, I know that you guys don't have
So
much, but
cool.
here you go." And so he first buys firewalls from me, and so I'm his
That's
sales
great.
engineer. I sell him firewalls, and then fast forward like another decade, if you will, and we meet up, and he's like a big executive at Palo Alto. So it's kind of a crazy world, right, for
Another
cybersecurity.
phenomenal
Yeah,
company with
yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah,
that's
absolutely. Yeah,
great. Like who would know, right? When you
yeah,
go on your vacation down there and you see locals, right? And
yeah.
you see them in restaurants, you see them in places, you're like, someday we're going to be working for you. You know what I mean? Like someday you are going to be heading up the
That's
cybersecurity
funny.
strategy. And they're like,
Mhm.
I'm looking for my ball right now. Like they like, I don't know. That's
Exactly.
phenomenal.
Yeah, the
That's
island
so
doesn't
cool.
necessarily breed lots of cybersecurity, but I think that's changing too, right? The island has seen a lot of shifts in the way that
I'll
tourism
tell you.
affects the economy, So yeah,
Yeah, unlike I will say I've been doing this for about like 24, 25 years now, and I can tell you that unlike the regular IT industry, right?
hmm
Cybersecurity is different. It's very related, but it's different.
yeah,
And in cybersecurity, I've met more people that are in leadership roles that came from marketing, small business. You would not believe some of the backgrounds they had. Wrestling.
oh wow,
I mean, it's just some phenomenal. But it has to do with that kind of desire to be part of something bigger than we are. So
yeah,
to be part of something that has a noble mission to it, like to protect and to serve, and it's really remarkable. Like
yeah.
I'm fascinated by the industry.
Yeah, it is. I think it is a passion. It is definitely a
Yeah.
passion of helping. When for about 3 years or so here at Crowdstrike, I ran the sales engineering team for our healthcare division, and that was actually, I think, even though I've been here for going on 9 years at Crowdstrike, and I've loved the company. I love everything that we do. I'm very passionate about it, but working in the healthcare space for me was a major eye opener on how much impact we were actually making, right?
Absolutely, especially when you hear about some of the breaches, and how it impacts patient care
Yes,
immediately.
exactly. Immediately.
I
Absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, and it's everywhere, and it's so funny because people don't know like how what we do affects daily life. But had a family member that was in the hospital recently, went and visited him, and lo and behold, right by the nurse's station, a huge sign like ransomware is a very big, make sure you do not click on links, make sure you do not attach any jump drives or like it was all about ransomware, and they had images of what it looked like and what to do
Wow.
if it's the number to call if it happens. And I'm like, right there next to somebody lying in bed was this thing about cybersecurity right
Yeah.
there. And I'm like, holy cow.
Yeah. The awareness
Um,
of it is actually a lot more significant, right? Especially for
oh yeah,
care, where there's patients' lives attached to these systems. The impact, like you
absolutely.
said, is can be it can be so much bigger than just a system that's down, and or it's not
Or
gonna just
just a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and data or a SQL
yeah,
database portions that get stolen. It's so much
exactly,
more impactful than just
absolutely,
the
absolutely.
intellectual property. Yeah, absolutely. So you came. W- Walk us through how you decided to leave St. Martin and come to the U.S.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of opportunity, right? Honestly, in the island, and most students once they're done with high school, they go to the Netherlands to study, right? If you're on the Dutch side, and then France if you're on the
Mm-hmm.
French side, or Canada. And being a U.S. citizen, being born in the U.S., I figured, hey, I have this dual citizenship. I might as well
Sure.
go back to my roots. And I was fairly young. I had just turned 17, and my brother had left the island a few years prior to me leaving, and he was telling me, hey, I just got Microsoft certified, and I'm learning all these
Oh,
things. You should come
interesting.
to the U.S. and I'm gonna take you under my wings, and that was very convincing, right? To say like, here's a lifestyle in the island that was just very limiting, and here's a really big world of opportunity in the U.S. And I was born there, and I would absolutely love to come out. And so I left, and I moved in with my brother, and he said, hey, these are the things you should start learning, right? Understand things like Active Directory, understand, the Microsoft operating system, and start going down this path of learning. And initially I was a bit apprehensive, and I had some interesting ideas of what I thought I wanted to do. And like I
Like
got
be a rock star, or
exactly.
you know what I mean? Like, yeah, but I could play guitar for
Yeah,
20,000
exactly.
people. Like, I
Exactly.
would rather do that. Oh, they're not hiring right now. Like, it's,
Yeah,
you gotta
exactly.
work. It's,
Exactly. Like, why, let me chase my passions.
right.
Um, and sometimes passion doesn't necessarily pay bills, in the short term.
Yeah. You got to
Um,
balance. That's what hobbies are for.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly correct. So I actually ended up, while in high school, I had to finish my last year of high school in the US, and
Mhm.
because I was only 17, and then things didn't really work out with my brother and I, it's another long
Being
story.
brothers. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, I was gonna go down this path of accounting, believe it or not, and like I had this
Oh,
person that was teaching me bookkeeping at this travel agency, and you know,
you would have been a very dynamic accountant, right? Be like accountants playing at the next bar mitzvah, like doing a bunch of band stuff. But I'm
yeah,
glad you chose
exactly.
cybersecurity. So that
I'm
was
believe me,
good.
I'm really glad to. I don't know how many
Yeah.
times I could have enjoyed carrying the one, right? So,
Right.
and so, my brother and I didn't work out. We kind of went separate ways. I had nowhere to go. I was living in this car. It was not
Really?
fun. Yeah, it was a
Wow.
very, it was just not fun to say the least. And
No.
so
No,
my,
that's a trying time. I
it's,
mean, it happens to a lot of people that we wouldn't otherwise think, honestly.
Yeah,
But
it was
it's
it was I remember my dad flying to the US and saying, "Hey, why don't you come back to St. Martin?" And I was like, "No, because I
hmm
feel like it would be like an admission of defeat." Right?
hmm
And
Sure.
so he was like, "Oh, why don't you try going to this homeless shelter?" And I was like, "Nope," because that also to me feels like I'm now relying on, someone else's hospitality, if you will. And I was like,
Yeah.
I really want to just kind of figure this out on my own. And so I was like, go back, take care of mom. I got this. And long story short, I
Scary times, right?
yeah,
Like
it was.
when you look back,
I think
it's
honestly,
like, but for the grace of God, go I. Like it could have gone south, like for a
yeah,
long time.
easily. But for
hmm
me, I was, think about those times, and it's a long time ago now. In the grand scheme of things, like over 20 years ago.
hmm
It was a major motivator for me. If anything, I even to this
Absolutely.
day harness that desire to, or that feeling of I never want to feel like that again, right? Like
Right.
that drive to say I'm going to get out of the situation and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to be very, very motivated to be successful. And
Yeah.
initially, you kind of have this feeling of I want to be successful because I want to prove my brother wrong, I want to prove my parents
Mhm.
wrong, I want to just kind of prove everyone wrong, and that is a major motivator. But then you have a family, and all of a sudden your motivators change. It's more of, well, not only do I never want to be there, I also want to make sure that I'm the best at what I do, so that
I would agree.
my
It becomes. I went through something similar, not as cool of a story or dramatic as a story, but to me it changes from ego driven to more cause driven,
Mhm.
right? Like you're
100%.
providing for others, you're providing for children, you're being in a more. It's a different role.
It is. It is. You're absolutely right. Ego driven is the exact phrase, right? Like you're just driven by this, and I told you so moment, right?
Yeah.
Or like here I proved you wrong. And I think it just, as you get older and more mature, you realize that there's a lot more to your purpose, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
there's a lot. Um, and so
So walk us through how you got into. So you began in IT. Did you get a couple initial
yeah,
basic technology certs? What's the
yeah,
first cert that you got? We always
I,
ask
yeah,
people that are trying to break in are always like, "What cert should I start with?" I'm like, it depends where you want to land, but
yeah. I
there
mean,
are good paths. So
yeah, yeah. So it's funny. I was working as a customer service rep for this financial company, and the first, and at school I was doing these programs. So the first cert that I got was my A plus cert, right? Like it was very,
okay, yeah,
relevant back then. Building computers,
hmm
and so I did my A plus cert, and then I did my network plus cert, which is just kind of an easy follow up. And then I had this choice of getting into a CCNA program or doing my Microsoft cert. So I ended up going to Microsoft, like doing my
okay,
MCSE, uh,
yep,
and kind of getting acclimated with everything Microsoft. But in tandem, while working for this company, we were acquired by a larger financial. They were like one of those debt consolidation companies that you
right,
see a plethora of them in Florida, or at the time you did, and before they were regulated. And another story. And I during the acquisition, there were two different databases that they were trying to migrate, and so one group was the acquiring company was very familiar with SQL,
hmm
and the other company that I was working for had built their entire database off of this tool called like FileMaker Pro or something like that, and the output of the way that you get data out was just very kludgy, and they were having some trouble mapping these fields over to SQL,
right,
and their SQL admin was having difficulty, and I said, hey, I have an idea, of like kind of validating the data and bringing it over, and I basically created a macro and I started validating things in the spreadsheet and just carrying it over. And I did it so quickly. And long story short, the director of IT of the acquiring company said, "Hey, like you're really good. Like, tell me your background." And I kind of told him what I just studied. I just got my MCSA, getting the MCSE, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come into the IT team? We literally have a role open. It'd be great if you can,
really.
start working."
So when you created this script, how did you know how to do that? Was that from your certifications, or
Yeah,
had you?
more dabbling. I'll spend a lot of time just reading. I was, I even picked up books on SQL, even though I wasn't managing databases. I just had a desire to understand, like, what are these languages that I'm ultimately going to run across in some fashion, right?
Yep.
Or, the FileMaker Pro, I think it was called. Like, I was very curious, like, what is this built on, right? So I started
Yeah.
getting into like things like MySQL and other storage solutions and then other languages and then I started getting into like web languages and building like websites, and I was just honestly, it was just pure curiosity, right, for me to say I really want to know a little more about what makes this specific application work.
I'll just keep talking.
Everybody, just wanted to mention Cybercrime Junkies Prime. We now have a subscription available through our podcast, and it offers exclusive content, bonus episodes, and even pre-releases of all of our standard shows.
We keep it simple. It's just the cost of 1 cup of coffee 1 time a month, and you can cancel anytime.
You can subscribe by scanning the QR code next to me in the video or by clicking the link in the show notes. If you select not to subscribe to our Prime membership, please at least consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It's at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast on YouTube, and it's absolutely free. It allows us to bring great guests on the show. Thank you for your support, and now let's get back to it. Okay, I can hear everything now.
Can you hear me
I
now?
can hear you now.
That was weird.
Okay, so that was me apparently. Well, good thing this isn't actually live and like nobody's really watching, so that's good. So
Yeah,
okay,
I was saying this is the beauty of live television, folks.
I know exactly. So it'll be interesting when I hear it back, when I watch it back, whether I'm the one going, I can't hear you, man. I can't. But then I would notice I couldn't hear the background music. And then I played that clip and I couldn't hear that. So it was
Okay.
me.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Well, and now we're back.
Now back to the show. Yeah.
Okay. So where were we?
I think we were just talking about the my curiosity of getting into things like SQL.
The script that you created and where you got that.
Yeah, just dabbling, self-dabbling, and referencing other scripts and then dissecting them and building myself. And that honestly just kind of sent me down the path of security, because we had someone that worked in cybersecurity, or really we had a guy that configured a firewall, right? He had like SUSE Linux and he configured it for the company as a firewall. And
at the financial company,
at the financial company,
okay,
exactly, right, or the newly reformed based upon the acquisition company,
right.
And I was like, oh, wow, like why is that important? And he kind of walked me through a scenario, and then we had some trouble, right? Like, here's why we do this. These people are trying to come in, and it was just to me very compelling, and that actually led to me working for a cybersecurity reseller right later on, like in my career, and that's really where I started spending a lot of time.
So after a few years there, you went to a reseller?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then from there you went on to Crowdstrike.
Yeah, for then I went on to I went from that reseller to basically Fishnet Security.
Oh, okay.
Basically is now Optiv.
Yep.
I went from Fishnet to WebSense, which is now ForcePoint, and did a lot of like consulting for like data loss prevention and proxy deployments, and you name it. They had a pretty broad portfolio. After that, I did a stint at Zimperium, which was a mobile security company, which was a lot of fun, but it was so early. It was so early, like my first paycheck was handwritten. That's how early it was.
Really?
Wow. I gave it to my wife and said,
check this out.
I hope this clears.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but it was a really, really fascinating technology at the time. And I spent a lot of time working with their offensive tools. They built a really great suite of offensive tools that you can run on a rooted tablet. So like a Google Nexus tablet it had everything from it acted
like radio frequency, like for Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
breaking. Is it something like the Flipper that's out there now?
No, actually. So think about a device that could act as like a Pineapple device where it broadcasts its own SSID.
Right.
It can intercept connections. It can, using like ICMP redirects or like ARP poisoning, it can basically manipulate all of your traffic once you connect to it. I can do session hijacking. I can steal your using like cookie tampering, or I can capture passwords and any type of requests and downgrade your SSL request on the back end. So even though it looks like you're logging into, your bank account and that connection should be encrypted, a lot of origin servers at the time would accept a request to downgrade the request or that connection. So the browser thinks that it's going to an SSL encrypted site, but on the back end, you're actually allowing that conversion into port 80 traffic, which is insane. And
that's crazy. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a cool tool.
It's a great tool. And what we would do is we would actually see like, okay, this person just logged into this account and they've used this password, and then I can actually do full session hijacking and get into that account and see what's in there.
Was that used for like red team exercises?
Exactly. They had a very big community that was using this tool at the time.
Were they at like DEF CON and Black Hat and things like that, or not?
Yeah. So like I did a few sessions at like Hack in the Box in the Netherlands, where I would go out there and we would do presentations and show folks that, hey, by the way, as long as you connect to this, as long as we're on the same wireless, SSID, I own you, right? And I can do full sniffing even on someone else's network, right? With this device, I could say, use like an Nmap like scan, or I can start sniffing all the traffic off the wire, right? Or the wireless wire. And I can see who's on the network, and then I can start intercepting people's connections. And we were kind of demonstrating this to say, this is a really great red teaming tool. But let's start understanding like how that impacts your mobile devices. And that was a very big kind of like point to say, like, think about, we had companies we worked with that would experience like they would go to foreign countries and they would see rogue towers stood up, and the technology that Zimperium built at the time was focused on understanding things like man-in-the-middle attacks, or our spoofing or ICMP redirect type of attacks that would try to intercept all of your communications. And so we would see companies that were getting their executives were getting manipulated into connecting to rogue tower, and then all of a sudden sensitive data being exfiltrated and so forth. So it was really cool at the time, just a little early for my appetite, and that ultimately led to me coming here to CrowdStrike.
So did you obtain any other certifications before going to CrowdStrike?
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of industry specific certs that were focused on the tools that I spent a lot of time managing, especially for a lot of the post implementation projects on the reseller side. You had to spend, you would get, based upon the products you represented, you'd have to get certified in every single one of them, understand the tooling. I studied for the CISP, never took the test just because I was consumed or had kids. And then
I've done the same thing. I've studied for it, and I've gotten to the point, but I've never managed a SOC. So like, even if you get it, like you know what I mean? My role is different anyway.
Yeah.
But the learning from it was phenomenal. It's a good global macro view of all of the sectors.
Absolutely. It's very wide in terms of the topics it covers and the domains it covers. And it's funny. I just had a conversation with a friend last week, and I said, hey, what do you think is like the next cert I should get? And he said, oh, you should do there's ISACA has I think it's called the C Risk cert.
Yeah.
And he said that's a really good one, especially just because a lot of the conversations I have now, or I've been having for this past several years, are really around mitigating risk.
Absolutely.
And governance and compliance. And he said, these are all he even said, hey, these are topics you're intimately familiar with. This should be a breeze for you, just because I've spent so much time in them. So those are others that I'm pursuing over the next basically this year. So
that's phenomenal. So let me ask you this: why is it important to understand the cyber criminal mind and the mindset and the personality when the goal is to secure an organization's brand?
So it's the same reason I was attracted to CrowdStrike, because of the intelligence narrative, right? Really great tool. When I came on board, they had this EDR tool, and it was great, but the narrative around tracking bad guys and understanding their motivations, that for me was this major eye-opener. It was this James Bond-esque moment for me to understand that, hey, we're, this company, CrowdStrike, is tracking some really bad guys, tied to like these three major categories of nation-state groups, e-crime groups, and hacktivist groups. And not only are we trying to understand the tools that they're using in their respective campaigns, but we're also looking at things like geopolitical motivations that drive these campaigns against very specific verticals. And so getting that insight for me was just this mind-blowing experience of saying wow, you're exposing the tradecraft of these bad guys. And it for me, I came to the realization, with every customer I met, that in order to understand these playbooks,
the risk, right? In order to guide you on risk, we have to understand what the risk is, the motivations behind the risk.
Absolutely. The motivations, and are they going to be relentless, right? Like, a lot of these groups have very scripted playbooks, and they're just going from one target to the next, and they're trying to get into, their next victim's environment, and their motivations are naturally going to vary based upon the group, the category they fall into, whether they're stealing intellectual property or if they're just looking for some type of monetary gain.
When you have organizations throwing out a bunch of IoT devices with fundamental basic passwords, right? You just want to hold them off long enough until they go, well, this is getting too hard. Let's just move on to the next guys, because they're still out there, right?
Yeah. Those, they're paid. Their 9 to 5 is to attack, right? Is for the cyber offense campaign, and I think it's great for customer. I've had this question so many times, even when I first started. Customers would say, "Why do I care? Why do I care about what this group out of China is doing?" And a lot of times it's maybe resetting that stage of understanding what risk really means to them. Say, hey, listen, if you're building something that is considered, your intellectual property, how economically, how are you going to be impacted if that IP is now being manufactured in a foreign country for, half the cost, right?
Right.
Are you going to be in business next year if that happens, right?
Right.
What type of impact is
Or
that
if the
to you, right?
source code is downloadable online for free, right? Like,
Exactly.
how valuable is
Absolutely.
your company? Right?
Exactly. How valuable is your company? And don't you want to understand what is driving that adversary activity towards your vertical? Or even if you don't feel like you'll be directly impacted, there's going to be some type of indirect impact, right? Think about supply chain impacts, right?
Downtime,
Down-
loss of production time,
Absolutely.
and
I mean,
all of that
there's-
has a financial impact.
Absolutely, it adds up, right? The soft cost. But even if you aren't targeted directly, what if one of your major business partners is targeted, and logistically now you're impacted because of them being down, right? Those are
Yeah.
all conversations that people just are, enterprises have been just so much more open to over the past maybe 4 to 5 years, versus like when I first started here, it was a bit of a challenge to kind of convince people to care, and now everyone cares, right? Because
Right. Well, it's always in the news.
it's always in the news, exactly. Even to your example of the healthcare system having a little sign that says this is ransomware, the awareness of the threat is actually becoming a lot more ubiquitous, which I think is actually a really good thing. Right?
Absolutely. No, that's phenomenal. Um, when you're evaluating risk with clients, how do you address how they manage third parties, like the vendors that they use, the subcontractors? How many of them are requiring the vendors that they use to bolster their cybersecurity?
Yeah, so more
Because to
mature.
me, that's always an issue,
It's a
right?
challenge. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a challenge because for the larger companies that have the more mature programs, they will have these checks and balances in place, right? Like a checklist that says, hey, third party company, before we start doing business with you, this is an assessment or a questionnaire that you need to answer. Truthfully, hopefully, right?
Right.
What your program is and how you respond to a threat, right? And because if you're going to connect to our network, or if you're going to have someone on site, or any type of relationship with us, we need to ensure that we're not at risk. And that actually has become a lot more common. But a lot of times, there's some consistency that's lacking, right? Or
Right.
maybe even like revisiting that process, right?
Mhm.
I think that has been a bit of a challenge. So we're always advising customers to enforce that checklist if they can. Make a recommendation. We don't necessarily have a say in what they recommend naturally, but if a customer is leveraging our technology and leveraging our managed service, or even leveraging our intelligence feed, we always say, hey, listen, at least have a program in place to help mitigate. There's
Sure.
going to be, your business has to have an appetite for accepting some type of risk at some point, right?
Absolutely.
So have some type of mitigating program in place, or some compensating control in place to help with accepting that. Right?
When we think about nation states and nation state attacks, we think about North Korea, China, the Eastern Bloc, right, Russia, etc. How do we advise? What are ways that an organization can protect themselves against nation state attacks?
That's a
I mean,
very
is
broad
there?
question.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Is there anything specific they can do other than realize they're going to be APTs? They're going to be advanced and persistent.
Yeah. So, again, I'm a very big fan of intelligence, our intelligence naturally, but there's a lot of other intelligence sources out there, right? So OSINT, right, being more of an open source intelligence, concept, and then like other commercially available products, right? I'm very big on the concept of having multiple intelligence sources and then having a team that can help operationalize it. And so, if you're trying to prepare yourself for a nation state attack, I don't necessarily think, I think that knowledge is power, right? And understanding things like a very, shifting, geopolitical landscape, right? And understanding, in these types of scenarios, this group is very much likely to respond from a cyber perspective like this, right?
Exactly.
And
right.
if you can prepare yourself for that type of response, or maybe even the fallout from that type of response, then I think you're better suited to be, protected against some type of attack. And then, of course, we're advocates for having visibility everywhere, right? At the end of the day, there's going to be something that's happening in your environment that allows somebody to kind of walk in through the front door. We're seeing that really big with the access broker narrative recently, right? Where e-crime groups are then just selling the keys to the front door, given like a slew of identities that they've compromised, right? So you go into any of these forums, and these access brokers are, categorizing the companies that they've ultimately victimized, and they're saying, here are 200 accounts that ultimately give you these types of NTFS permissions, and this is the cost, and this is the industry of the company that they're in, and this is their revenue model and how much they make annually. But more importantly, as of recent, we've even seen postings where access brokers are highlighting if a company that they've compromised has cyber insurance and what the payout value is. So think about that, right? If you have a $10 million payout value on your cyber insurance, you now have attracted a group of cyber criminals that want to launch that ransomware against you, right? Or want to extort you for the data that they've exfiltrated because they know that cyber program is going to pay it out in some fashion. And so, those are...
So intelligence gathering, understanding the behavioral analytics or the behavioral personalities, almost like the behavioral analysis of your industry, who the client is, right? Yeah. And who seems to be targeting that industry in particular. Understanding who those threat actors are is really key to even being prepared for a nation state attack.
Absolutely correct, right? Because they're going to use a very specific types of tooling, right? Or again, they may use an identity that was compromised in some type of previously harvested credential campaign, and then there's a very specific set of tradecraft that they walk through once they're in your systems, right? And that could be a very specific technique for lateral movement so that they stay under the radar, or leveraging tools that are inherent to the operating system so that they can turn the OS on their respective victims. I mean, there's just very specific tradecraft that these groups, are using in these campaigns. It's very consistent, right? And sure, does it evolve? Absolutely. But when you have a group that you're targeting, it's a playbook, right? It's a script that they run. They're going to go through, step A through step Z. And once they get onto that system, exfiltrate their data, and they're out, right? There's going to be remnants of essentially, that activity that you will see, especially with Crowdstrike having so much telemetry across millions of endpoints. We're analyzing trillions of events a day. We have this really great visibility into understanding what that tradecraft looks like and how consistent it is based upon the actors that we track. And that's actually pretty powerful too, right? So.
Absolutely. And then understanding the IABs, right? Those initial access brokers that don't want to, it's kind of a good gig for them if you think about it, because they don't have to be involved in the actual ransomware launch or the actual, execution of it, right? They just kind of have their access and they sell it and they're done. But knowing what is out there, what they have, having eyes on that is really key.
Absolutely. It's really key. Or even being aware of the potential of your business that information being sold that is specific to your business, right?
Right.
You see that a lot too, right?
We recently were speaking with some security researchers on two elements of that. One was in the analysis of the Black Cat ransomware gang, how they've basically built an internal search so that people can find and slice their data for all of the victim data, right? That's something very unique. And then you've got Lockbit 3.0. Another researcher was talking to us about Lockbit's 3.0 and how they've developed this Lockbit Black, which really eliminates the need for IABs. Like they won't even need initial access brokers. It'll all be one program where they find the vulnerability themselves and then launch. They're getting more and more sophisticated, aren't they?
They're getting sophisticated, and they're also making it easier for their audience, right, or their consumers, right? Almost as if they're kind of this broker or this multi-level marketing iteration of ransomware e-crime, right? Where in lieu of selling, Avon products, right, they're selling essentially, access to these systems, and
they have professional videos online.
They've simplified it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and they have professional videos on online advertising for services, like the various ransomware gangs, like next generation ransomware. Get your extortion campaign through us, and you're like, wow, John Gotti would be so impressed with you guys. Like, wow, you guys are out there, man.
They've made it very easy, and I think it also speaks to the volume of attacks that we're seeing, right? Because the easier they make it, the more that they'll attract a very specific type of persona, right? To say, hey, here's an easy way of making a quick buck. And then ultimately that leads to, these campaigns that are just picking up, or the script kiddies that are coming out of the woodworks, getting access to these tools. And, I'm sure that in the wake of the pandemic and people not necessarily having access to jobs that once were there, I'm sure that also was very, very, very responsible for, idle hands, right? Being being out there looking
Absolutely.
for something to do.
Yeah, everybody was kind of locked away at home online, and you put them out of work. What are they going to do,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. Oh, man. So let me ask you about this. Obviously, last Thursday, the administration created and launched the new national cybersecurity strategy. And there have been other iterations. The big one, 2003, and then there have been other ones, 2008, 2012. What is your impression on this? How is this one going to be different? It's a broad question, but I just wanted to start wide and then kind of go down, because it seems like they have those pillars. They have about 5 pillars. One was critical infrastructure. One was shifting liability to those that are creating software, hardware products to actually own based on some standard, and then create a safe harbor for them. And then there's other elements there too that got more specific. I was just curious what your initial thought was. Meaning, some people that I've talked to that come from federal law enforcement and some others were like, they had to issue one, so they issued one, but we don't think there's going to be much change. And I clearly understand that. But this one, I think, given the launch of ChatGPT recently and the mass adoption of it, as well as the recent hits on critical infrastructure, I could see this one actually leading to more regulations, different standards, maybe an expansion on the NIST standards. What are you seeing? What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, they've already went down this path for expanding on NIST, right? With like CMMC. So if you remember if you look at what CMMC is, it's kind of massive culmination of things like NIST, and those standards are I think are going to become adopted on a wider scale, right? Especially with a program like this driving
more in the
awareness.
private sector, a little bit more bleeding over. You
Yeah,
think?
probably in the private sector for especially business partners that are working within the federal space,
Sure.
and that have maybe ties into more state and local. I think personally that state and local will benefit from these programs a little more. They've been historically underfunded. I think they've been understaffed. When I ran the public sector program here, most conversations with every state that you meet with are fairly consistent, right? It's a lack of expertise, it's a lack of funding,
Right.
and these federal programs, from my understanding, these federal programs have also been developed to allow these state and local governments to get access to better funding and maybe better expertise, or maybe even outsourcing these programs into like more managed service offerings that allow them to take a little bit of a breather and know that there is expertise available to kind of help them through these major shifts in focus, right?
Yeah, because when we think of I love that insight, because when we think of critical infrastructure, people think of, well, the federal government with all their expertise and all their resources. I'm like, critical infrastructure is your local water company.
Yeah,
It's your local water plant. They don't have the funding. They don't have a CISO.
Yeah,
Okay?
exactly.
Like, they don't have a CISO. I'm telling you, they don't, right? Like, even some of the mid-scale cities, like I'm just shocked at the lack of evolution in cybersecurity that these organizations have. It's alarming to some extent.
They're definitely suffering, right? They're undoubtedly suffering because, I mean, even if you look at the, it's a cycle, right? Whenever like a local government hires someone and they've invested the time in that person getting up to speed with cybersecurity, and then of course they get access to whatever tool that they're using or tools that they're using for just awareness of what their cybersecurity program should evolve into. Let's just say that's a 2 or 3 year process. By the time year 3 hits and that individual has attracted the attention from every vendor in the industry trying to sell a tool into that municipality or that agency, that person's value just skyrocketed, right?
And they're going to move on from the local
on.
water company.
Exactly,
Right.
correct. And it's unfortunate because they can't afford to keep that person now.
Right.
And the private sector is going to scoop up that person in a heartbeat because there's such a deficit in expertise.
Yep.
And then that cycle starts all over, right? And so it is actually very difficult for these agencies to kind of keep that talent, right?
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's really good insight, because that's the other side of the skills gap that everybody talks about, right? Like, everybody talks about the skills gap, like, well, there's all these jobs out there. What do I need to get trained on? But then that's a really interesting point, because when people gain the experience in there, they're taken out of certain industries,
Yes.
right?
Exactly.
And that void, that gap there is created.
It's created, and then it takes a while to fill again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like they have, cybersecurity experts on a bench just kind of waiting for the next opportunity,
No.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's been pretty tough, and again, competitively, the private sector is always going to outperform, these smaller state groups, right?
Yep.
And
Well, yeah. They're more nimble. They've got a little bit of funding.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think this one will be interesting to watch, especially what comes next. Right. Some of the regulations, some of the changes in standards. There are some ISOs. We're part of a Silicon Valley think tank, the Breda Totora Breda Institute, and we meet with these people all quarterly, and then there's other sessions. But we were talking to some of them recently, and they were doing an ISO, ISAO, information sharing analytics organization, and they've had these discussions with NATO, with the U.S. Congress, and the executive team, but to really create some standards for critical infrastructure. I'm curious how do in the national cybersecurity strategy that was just released, they talked about the need for the private sector and the public sector to collaborate. What are you seeing in terms of? I mean, you guys are really on the cutting edge at CrowdStrike. What are you seeing open collaboration, or where do you think some improvement can be made there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we've been doing for quite some time, honestly, right? So I think the official announcement of it, doesn't necessarily mean that we haven't been doing it before, right? We've been
Right, of course.
collaborative. We work with the Five Eyes, for example, right? And so we've been very open to intelligence sharing. We follow this open, or rather this all source methodology internally, and ultimately, our access to on the federal side and even the state side has been fairly open, right? The questions pour in all the time. So I think what it really does is it should usher in a sharing opportunity even across other industries that historically haven't been giving data to the government, right? Think about, I don't know how much involvement the other ISACs have, but we get involved with almost every ISAC, whether we have feet on the ground, right? Like people that are involved locally, or we have our entire intelligence team, which is its own arm that focuses on collection and sharing and so forth. Right, that team in itself has been very open to doing this, in the past. So I don't think it's necessarily anything new to us. I think what it also does, though, is it gives opportunity for sharing more trending data, right?
Right.
Like we have really great intelligence on what adversaries are ultimately doing. But I think, I'm sure there's going to be a question about like what else is CrowdStrike seeing, across the rest of the world, right? And what type of endpoint activity, or what we're seeing a major shift in, not even a shift, but we're seeing a lot of emphasis put into adversaries targeting cloud solutions, right? So what is CrowdStrike seeing from a cloud perspective, right? And a lot of that information is accessible. We publish a lot of that information today, even freely on our blog. And I think if we need to be officially part of a program that warrants us kind of sharing that information, right? That's nothing that we would be opposed to. We have a whole team that's focused on that. Right?
Oh yeah, no, I'm more curious about what the public sector will do. Meaning, when certain elements of the public sector get it, I'm hopeful that they then distribute it more downstream, so that the federal government gets that. But how much of that data is making it to the state and local level?
Yeah,
it needs to filter all the way through and everybody be on the same page, because
I definitely agree with that. But I think also the challenge there is how does an understaffed group, right?
What are they going to do with the intelligence, right?
How do they operationalize it exactly, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the challenges where we've had so many conversations even with smaller agencies, and they said, listen, this is great, but I want just like IOCs, right? And sometimes I think you need something more than just an IOC feed. I think you need a little more context on why you should be concerned about this specific domain, right? Or this IP address.
Yeah, and what actionable steps you can take within your limited budget and within your limited resources.
Exactly. And I think that's the challenge of saying, hey, intelligence is fantastic, but if you can't operationalize it, then it's kind of a moot point, right? So
absolutely.
I think that's
great. Well, being in your role, you see enterprise organizations, you see leading things, you see all these trends. You guys have phenomenal intelligence. Are there any best practices you can recommend on what a understaffed or a small to mid-sized business can do? Like, what are some of the main things that they can be doing? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a trend that we're seeing is a major move into managed services, honestly, right? Where, you know, most companies that are
Leverage the
understaffed
scale, right?
leverage
Leverage the
scale,
scale that
exactly.
an MSSP or an MSP can provide.
Yeah, or an MDR, right? Think about
Right.
they have that expertise and they have the visibility into like everything happening
Yep.
across like multiple verticals.
Yep.
And traditionally, you work with a smaller company and they have the same guy that's running security is also the same guy running IT, right? And
Yeah. I mean,
running
that's so
everything,
common.
right?
It's
Exactly, right?
it's shocking. They're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, I'm secure. Bob's got it." I'm like,
exactly.
"Bob as your security? Wow.
Hey, no offense, Bob.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. No offense, Bob. You're
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
it doesn't matter how bright or great experience Bob has,
Yeah.
right?
It's a lot, right?
It's
It's
a
a lot for one
lot.
person to handle.
Yeah.
And that separation of duties is very difficult, right? When you're
Right.
understaffed or even if you did have one security guy that's dedicated, it's one security guy against,
Right.
armies of, offensive security campaigns, right? And so,
Right.
um,
And
I
attacks
always
from every level, right?
every
From
level,
social engineering to brute
exactly,
force
yeah.
to like, there's so many different
Yeah.
DDoS attacks. Like, how is one person supposed to address all
Exactly,
that?
and he's got to sleep at some point,
Right.
right? And take care of
Exactly.
his family. And so, I'm a big fan listen. If you're understaffed, like it's going to save you in the long run to go into a
Right.
managed service offering to get a little bit of that pressure off of your plate, and then from there you can kind of refocus your expertise into something that's going to be very business impacting.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm a very big fan of that.
Yeah. Great. Excellent. So much. So what's on the horizon for you? So you've got the role of CTO for the Americas for CrowdStrike. What are some of the main initiatives you've got coming in the next year?
Yeah, so we've been expanding our platform, organically, acquisitions over the past several years, and we've been really building a lot of those new capabilities into this very cohesive platform now, right? Where customers can log into the UI and they have access to all of these modules. And when I first started here, there were 3 things that we did, and now there's like 25 things that we do. And
Right.
so,
It's great.
my objective for my roadshow is really meeting with as many customers as possible and understanding, are they getting the most out of their investment, right? I really want to ensure that they're happy, that their security challenges or their concerns can be met with what we've developed and what we are developing. And if we can build something new or maybe even get into maybe a partnership that makes sense for our customers, my objectives are to explore those, till I'm completely fatigued, right? And ensure that
Right.
those integrations make sense and that they're actually our customers are getting value out of basically what we're building, right? And so there's going to be some really great announcements later on this year with respect to new capabilities of the platform and new modules. We're pretty excited about our threat intelligence global threat report rather that just was released. So if you haven't read that as yet, it actually gives some really great perspective around
We
e-crime
will have a
activity.
link. Yeah, we will have a link in the show notes to that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's
Yep.
freely available, and it really puts a spotlight on some of the fallout from the Russia-Ukraine activity that we're seeing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's one of the better ones.
yeah,
Like I've always looked at a lot of them that come out, the
sure,
Verizon
yeah,
risk assessment,
yeah.
things from
Good
the
report.
FBI,
Yeah,
Department of Homeland Security, things like that. But this is it's really remarkable. It's so broad, and you can just see it's based on so much data and
it's a lot of
intelligence. It's
data.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
lot.
It's a really great write-up.
Yeah.
Every year it's a really good one, but this year I think it's very relevant to a
Oh
lot that's
yeah.
happening. That's like
Yeah.
just so much that's happening. So that's going to be a really great report if you haven't read that as yet. Just was released last week. So,
Yep. No, yeah, I took a look at it, got through a bunch, and then I skimmed it, but I need to get a pot of coffee and go through it. You know what I mean? Because it was a lot.
yeah,
And
it's
I
a
was
lot.
like, oh man, this is great. Well, I do the same thing when the Verizon risk assessment comes out or whatever, right?
It's a
Like
good report. Yeah.
you've always got to kind of look at those. Just phenomenal intelligence, right?
Yeah.
It's great. So, Before we go, thank you so much, Christian, by the way. Like,
Thank
dude,
you. Thank you
so
much.
great. Speaking of, sorry about the technical glitches. Don't worry about that. It'll all be edited in post-production. Before anybody sees this or hears this, no one will know anything was happening. But little do you know backstage how rough it was. Tell you've got a whole studio there, right? You're a musician, you're a parent. Walk us through. What do you like to play? What type of things
Man.
do you like to record? What do you
I
do?
love to record. I love producing music. Like a lot of times I have like a bunch of guitars and I'll just, record everything from R&B like music to even some hip hop to alternative. I just do it more for the passion, right? I just really enjoy it. I play piano, usually more like sappy music that I play on piano.
That's great.
So I was in New York and I was at this hotel lobby and they had a big, grand piano. And I said,
yeah.
"Hey, can I get on there?" And I start playing music and I played like maybe 3 or 4 songs and I was with some friends and they were like, "Can you play any music that's happy?" I'm like, "I don't know anything that's in a major chord."
That's great.
Play drums, play some sax. Honestly, music is very much my outlet, right? So
Yeah.
when I'm bored, I'm playing a lot of music, right?
Yeah, me too. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
I've been playing since I was a kid.
Nice.
I wanted to play, electric guitar in a band, and my mom was like, "You're gonna play. You're gonna take classical guitar lessons."
Oh, wow.
So I started there, but then after you go through that structure, the other stuff just comes like
Oh, it's
I'm able to.
easy.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so great! Like you can just hear a song and just pick it up and play it, and it's great. Write songs. It's
Oh,
so much
wow.
fun.
I'm envious.
Yeah.
I never took classical guitar lessons, although
Oh,
I
I was
always
beaten
wanted
into doing it, so it wasn't a pleasurable experience. But I still remember the songs that I had to write. You had to create your own songs and then perform in a
Oh, wow.
concerto. Like it was like really formal, but it was really good foundational. It's like taking an etiquette class. Like what you're supposed to do at the dinner table, but now you can still put your elbows on and still eat with your hands and stuff. But that if you're in the right place or you're put there for at a business meeting, you kind of know what to do. So it was very much like that. But it's
cool.
really fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, dude. Like I think music and the study of music, it just helps people learn and breed creativity, and
Agreed.
it helps professionally.
Yeah, I think it also keeps your mind operating at a different pace, right? Because when
Yeah.
you're playing guitar or piano, your mind is in a
Is
very
there.
high state of function, right?
Right.
And I think that even helps you with like everyday tasks, right? Having that
Yeah.
ability to multitask. So.
Absolutely, man. That's so cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Christian Rodriguez, connect with him on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me sharing your
Yeah, go
LinkedIn
for it.
out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've got some great posts, great content, and we'll have the Crowdstrike links to Crowdstrike, links to the Crowdstrike Global Threat Report, and thank you so much. This hopefully this will not be the last time that we speak, my friend.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Very
And-
cool. Thank you so much, my man.
All right. I'll see
See
you.
you. Bye.
Hey, well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Our next episode starts right now.
Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free, and download the podcast episodes available everywhere you get podcasts.
To support our show and get exclusive pre-release episodes and bonus content, please subscribe to Cybercrime Junkies Prime.
Link in the description and show notes. And thanks for being a cybercrime junkie.